So, there's this story about a young student who goes up to his venerable master,
Okay.
and he asks him, "What is the secret to eternal happiness?" And the master just pauses, looks the student right in the eye and says, "Don't argue with stupid people."
Wow. Just right to the point.
Right. But the student is completely shocked. He shakes his head and goes, "Wait, no, that can't be it. That can't be right."
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, the master just looks at him for like a long, quiet 3 seconds and simply says, "You are right."
That is, I mean, the sheer economy of that exchange is just,
Brilliant.
it really is.
The master is like demonstrating his own philosophy in real time. The
Yeah.
very second the student tries to initiate an argument or, create friction, the master just completely steps off the battlefield. He totally refuses to engage.
Yeah, exactly. And for Joseph Bay, the author of the essay we're diving into today, that little joke, it landed with the weight of well, a really profound philosophical revelation.
It's a huge shift in perspective. It is. Welcome to this deep dive into an essay titled The Secret to Happiness. Our mission today is to explore this really fascinating psychological transition. We're looking at the journey of moving from exhaustive, endless ideological combat into a space of selective, peaceful engagement. So let's get into it. What is this baseline reality for him? Because it sounds like he's incredibly alienated from the mainstream.
Alienated is an understatement. I mean, living in a reality that fundamentally rejects every mainstream institution creates this enormous burden of proof on the individual.
Because you're constantly fighting against the current.
Yes. If everyone around you accepts standard media or, say, mainstream medicine as the baseline truth and you completely reject it, simply existing in society requires you to constantly be on the defensive.
That sounds exhausting right out of the gate.
It really is. Bay maps out a worldview that is fiercely, unapologetically anti-left in pretty much all its forms. And he doesn't just, disagree with mainstream narratives. He genuinely believes they are structurally corrupt.
Yeah, he lists out those beliefs very specifically to give the reader a sense of his daily reality. I mean, he believes there's a globalist satanic cabal responsible for a lot of the world's chaos, and he points to the Epstein files as, his confirmation for that.
Right.
And when he looks at mainstream media, specifically calling out the BBC, he doesn't just perceive a slight editorial bias, he actually views them as one of the most destructive forces operating in the West today.
And he goes further with politics and health, too. He states that Trump derangement syndrome is a far deadlier and more damaging illness than COVID ever was.
Yeah, and his views on religion are equally absolute. He views Islam not just as a different faith, but as a cancer that is fundamentally incompatible with Western civilization.
So the underlying mechanism of this distrust is what we really need to focus on here, because it doesn't just stop at politics or media. It bleeds into everything.
Like diet and medicine.
Exactly. Diet, medicine, theology, history, education, the sciences. His considered conclusion is that the incentive structures within all these institutions completely compromise them.
Oh, right. Like if a dietary board is heavily funded by massive food conglomerates.
He doesn't just see their food pyramid as slightly flawed, he sees it as a marketing brochure masquerading as science.
Wow, okay.
Or if a medical institution profits from managing chronic sickness rather than actually curing it, the data they produce is, in his eyes, inherently corrupted by that profit motive. He actually advises that you are usually better off doing the exact opposite of what the mainstream dictates.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. It's like the author is playing a completely different game of chess on a totally different board than the rest of society.
That is a great way to put it.
So it's not a matter of him missing the mainstream information. It's a matter of a missing translation. It's like trying to pay for groceries with monopoly money. You can count out the bills perfectly, the math can be absolutely flawless, but if the cashier doesn't recognize the currency as valid, the transaction fails entirely.
Right, the system rejects it.
Bayes' framework completely invalidates the mainstream economy of facts. So my guiding question for you is, when someone's baseline reality is this disconnected from the mainstream, what happens when they actually try to engage with other people?
Well, the immediate consequence of holding that kind of worldview is pure, unadulterated exhaustion.
I can imagine.
Because when the gap in your worldview is that massive, when your currency isn't accepted anywhere, the amount of energy required to bridge that gap through sheer debate is astronomical. This is really the central conflict of the essay.
Because he didn't just hide away, right?
No, Bay isn't someone who held these views quietly in a cabin somewhere. He fought for them.
Yeah. He describes spending years in these arguments, just long, drawn-out debates, hours, days, sometimes months, going back and forth with leftists, progressives, or what he calls woke churchgoers.
And the outcome of these battles was never a mutual understanding. He always came away feeling angry, frustrated, and experiencing what psychologists might call severe compassion fatigue, or just ideological burnout.
But there was a bitter irony to it, wasn't there?
Oh, totally. These arguments did have one tangible benefit for him. They made him a formidable debater. The intense pressure of constant argument forced him to rigorously sharpen his own points.
Right. He became incredibly articulate in defending his positions.
Exactly. He got really, really good at fighting his corner, but the ultimate payoff was zero. He realized that the other person never moved. Not 1 inch.
Wait. I have to push back on this premise for a second. Aren't facts supposed to be the great equalizer? I mean, if you have the right statistic or the perfect historical example, shouldn't that eventually win the day?
You would think so, right?
Yeah. If two people look at the exact same data, logic dictates they reach some sort of common ground eventually.
And that is the exact assumption Bay operated under for years. It's the bedrock of Western rationalism. We tend to think of arguments like a math equation.
Right.
We assume that if we just input the right variables, the irrefutable statistic, the perfect historical analogy, the other person's brain will naturally calculate it and output agreement.
But that didn't happen.
No, because he realized that a gap in fundamental framework cannot be closed by logic alone. Facts do not exist in a vacuum. They are interpreted through a pre-existing lens.
Oh, I see where this is going. If the framework is fundamentally different, the data itself is useless.
Exactly.
It's basically like trying to run a Mac software file on a Windows computer. The data inside the file isn't broken, the code is perfectly fine, but the operating system simply rejects it as invalid.
That's a perfect analogy. Logic only works when both parties are running the same operating system and agree on the rules of evidence. Bay realized they weren't just disagreeing on the conclusion of a shared reality, they were disagreeing on the very nature of reality itself.
Wow, that's a huge realization.
It is, because if logic and facts aren't working, and the operating systems are incompatible, it forces a pretty uncomfortable mirror onto the person making the argument.
This is where the essay shifts, right?
Yeah, this is the pivot point. It shifts from a socio-political critique into this raw piece of self-reflection. Bay is forced to ask himself a really painful question.
Which is?
If the right sequence of facts was never going to work, why did I spend years thinking it would?
Oh, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. He realizes that his persistent arguing, all those hours spent trying to, wake people up,
Right.
it wasn't actually born out of a desire to help them or out of a genuine love for his fellow man.
What was it born out of?
Arrogance. It was pride. It was this presumptuous belief that his opponent was just a few steps behind him on the path of enlightenment, and Joseph Bay, was the grand teacher, destined to push them across the finish line right then and there.
There's a phrase he uses from the text that I think cuts right to the psychological core of the issue. He calls it ego wearing the costume of conviction.
Yes, ego wearing the costume of conviction.
We really need to unpack that because conviction usually feels righteous, doesn't it? Standing up for the truth feels noble.
It does. But the psychology here suggests something much more self-serving is happening under the surface. It's tied to identity protection.
How so?
Well, when you hold a worldview that isolates you from the mainstream, your identity becomes deeply intertwined with being right while the rest of the world is wrong.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when you force your facts onto someone who is unreceptive and they reject those facts, it actually threatens your worldview. So you argue harder.
So it stops being about them.
Exactly. It ceases to be about revealing the truth to them. It becomes about soothing your own cognitive dissonance. You need them to agree with you so that your own intelligence and reality are validated. You're using them to stabilize your own ego.
Wow. So what does this all mean? It's basically like trying to drag someone up a mountain when they didn't even pack hiking boots and then getting mad at them for tripping.
That's exactly it. You can't force someone to undertake a psychological journey they have no intention of taking, just to prove to yourself that the mountain exists.
That's powerful.
Bay comes to the stark conclusion that argument alone practically never changes a worldview. You cannot debate someone into a new reality. He believes that only lived experience, and from his specific theological perspective, the grace of God, can actually shift someone's fundamental framework.
And that theological perspective serves as the anchor for his new approach, doesn't it?
Yes, he takes this realization about ego versus love, and he connects it deeply to his faith. He finds ancient precedent for his modern burnout.
He points to the gospel, which in his worldview is the ultimate, greatest truth in existence, the concept of salvation and grace. And he notes a very specific biblical concept from the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 6.
Do not cast your pearls before swine.
Exactly. But how does he apply that to his everyday arguments?
The logic he applies to it is striking. He argues that if the message of Jesus Christ, which he considers the absolute pinnacle of truth and good news, frequently met with intense rejection, mockery, and resistance, why on earth should he expect his personal views on media bias or dietary health to be universally welcomed?
Right.
If the ultimate truth is violently rejected by the world, his political opinions are guaranteed to face hostility in the wrong ears.
I hear that. I really do. But, and maybe this is just me, it feels like a dangerous slippery slope. If we just dismiss everyone who disagrees with us as swine, or assume they just have an incompatible framework, aren't we just building massive, impenetrable echo chambers?
That's a very fair point.
How does Bay justify not just becoming totally isolated, only talking to people who already agree with him?
That is the defining tension of his realization. The lesson he draws from Pearls Before Swine isn't to take a vow of permanent silence or to retreat into an echo chamber.
Okay, so what is the solution then?
It's about developing a rigorous system of discernment. What's fascinating here is the distinction between completely giving up on people and practicing selective engagement to protect your own peace.
So it's about learning to just sort of read the room.
Exactly. Reading the room and evaluating the intent of the person sitting across from you. He identifies two vastly different types of people.
Okay, who's the first type?
On one hand, you have individuals with open hands. These are people who might completely disagree with you, but they are genuinely searching. They're asking questions in good faith, and their psychological operating system is at least receptive to new data. They are open to receiving the pearl of your perspective.
And the second type?
On the other hand, you have people who are merely performing. People who want the friction of the argument for its own sake to validate their own egos, or who are so deeply entrenched that engaging with them is just a theatrical drain on your energy.
It's a really powerful shift in mindset, moving from a combative posture to an evaluative one.
It saves a lot of mental anguish.
It definitely does. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, the essay also takes a very sharp turn to show us what it looks like when that ideological burnout goes unchecked and reaches its absolute breaking point.
Yes, the cynical edge.
Exactly. To illustrate total exhaustion, Bay points to a viral sentiment he saw online. And it perfectly captures the raw, cynical edge of this philosophy when taken to the extreme.
He references a tweet that deeply resonated with him. Now, he doesn't entirely adopt its tone, but he completely understands the psychological state that produced it.
Let me outline this tweet because it is incredibly provocative. It's an anonymous person declaring that they are officially done giving people facts, statistics, or firsthand experiences. They're just done trying to save anyone.
Total surrender.
Total surrender. And the tweet cynically tells ideological opponents to essentially go ahead and do everything they want. Take all the experimental vaccines, take all the antidepressants, chop off body parts, and even sign up for MAID.
Which is medical assistance in dying.
Right. The author of the tweet literally says, that's my medical advice to you. You win. Because, as they point out, when they tried to give the exact opposite advice, they were silenced, complained about, and ostracized. So now they're just stepping back and letting people face the severe consequences of their own choices.
It is a dark, highly cynical surrender. And Bay himself acknowledges how cynical it is, but he includes it because he recognizes the brutal honesty in it.
Right.
He calls it the honest sound of a man who fought, who was silenced, who tried again, who was ignored, and who has finally stopped trying to carry people who are fiercely determined not to be carried.
But Bay clarifies, he isn't quite at this level of total cynicism, right? He still believes in speaking truth when the moment is right and the hands are open.
Correct. But he completely understands the exhaustion behind that tweet.
So I have to ask you, where is the line here? Where is the boundary between a kind of righteous, peaceful detachment and just cynically giving up on humanity altogether out of spite?
That's the million-dollar question. Cynical surrender, like the tweet, is ultimately rooted in reactive bitterness.
Reactive bitterness.
Yeah. You're stepping away because you are angry that you lost the debate, and you want the other person to suffer the consequences as a form of cosmic, I told you so.
Wow, yeah.
Righteous detachment, on the other hand, which is what Bay is striving for, is proactive. It's
Right.
recognizing your own limitations. It's saying, I value my truth and I value my psychological energy too much to waste them on a performance.
It's the difference between slamming the door in someone's face because you're furious they won't listen versus simply deciding not to walk into a burning building in the first place because you know you don't have enough water to put out the fire.
That is perfectly stated. It's about preserving the pearl rather than punishing the swine. Bay realizes that continuing to argue with a closed mind doesn't actually help the other person, and it actively harms him. It depletes him.
So the boundary lies entirely in your motivation. Are you stepping back out of spite to watch them fail, or are you stepping back out of wisdom and self-preservation?
Exactly.
Bringing this all together, Bay's ultimate secret to happiness isn't about lowering your convictions. He isn't suggesting you pretend the world is fine or that your beliefs don't matter. They matter enormously to him.
Right. He still holds all of those core beliefs.
But he has learned through years of painful, unnecessary friction that not every battle is yours to fight. Happiness, in this context, is the hard-won wisdom of knowing who is worth the argument and who is a trap. It's the peace of mind that comes from saving your pearls.
And recognizing when an argument is a gateway to genuine understanding versus when it is just an ego-driven drain on your spirit is a vital psychological survival skill for anyone living in our current information age.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. Think about the debates in your own life. Audit your own interactions. Whether it's the arguments you get dragged into at work, the endless, exhausting back and forths in a comment section online, or even those tense debates across the family dinner table during the holidays.
You've all been there.
Ask yourself, in those moments, are you arguing to share a pearl with someone who is genuinely searching with open hands? Or are you exhausting yourself in a performance? Are you letting your own ego wear the costume of conviction while trying to forcefully rewrite the operating system of someone whose worldview is permanently set?
It requires a lot of honesty to admit when you're arguing for your own ego rather than for the truth.
It really does.
Master, what is the secret to eternal happiness?
Do not argue with stupid people.
That's it? I don't think that works.
You are right.